Welcome to breaking news coverage on SNY's digital platforms. I'm Jeane Coakley, alongside our SNY NFL insider Connor Hughes and our Jets analyst Connor Rogers. Guys, the Jets have a new head coach. Connor Hughes, you confirmed that Aaron Glenn will be their next head coach, the 22nd head coach in franchise history. Of course, Glenn, a former first-round pick of the New York Jets, spent 8 seasons with the team. He, of course, was the Lions' defensive coordinator the last 4 seasons and part of an incredible turnaround up in Detroit. Connor Hughes, I'm going to start with you. Glenn was at Florham Park yesterday. How did this all come together in such a short time?
Well, I don't think it's really come together in a short time, Jeane. This pursuit of Glenn has been going on for quite a while. I don't think that there is no question at all that when this entire process or search for a new head coach began, the Jets' number one candidate was Mike Vrabel. That was the guy that they wanted. And that's not a shot at Aaron Glenn. Quite literally every single team with a vacancy had Vrabel at the top of their board. But Vrabel made it very clear, despite the fact that Jets offered him full control of personnel, a ton of money, he made it clear that the job that he wanted was the Patriots. So when that Patriot job opened, there was nothing that the Jets could do to get him here. Glenn was their number 2 candidate. The links were there and obvious. So this has been a long pursuit. They brought him in for the first visit when the Lions were eliminated from the playoffs a little bit earlier than some expected. The Jets had a chance to jumpstart this search to get him here and finalize it because in-person interviews could begin. They had a tremendous second interview yesterday. Glenn flew home to Detroit, but this was really just about things getting finalized. The agent and the team coming to terms with the finalizing, all the I's dotting, T's crossing. But it was pretty much done yesterday. In fact, I talked to multiple sources around the league, specifically a couple assistant coaches who will be on Aaron Glenn's staff here with the Jets, who told me, no, I've talked to Glenn. He's got the job, and the job is with the Jets. I'm joining his Jets staff, not the Saints staff, the Jets staff.
And Glenn obviously wanted the Jets. He made it perfect clear he wanted to be the Jets head coach. Connor Rogers, what was your initial thoughts about this hiring?
Well, it took us a long road to get here from what we thought 2 months ago was kind of the logical conclusion. If the Jets couldn't get Mike Vrabel, the Jets made it clear what kind of coach they want. They wanted somebody that can lead, that can be the face of the organization, that can get buy-in from a team that is coming off a really, really rough season in terms of where morale is at right now. And what they learned the hard way, unfortunately, during the Robert Saleh era is you need to hire a head coach that has hiring power. That is with the staff, offensively, defensively, special teams, across the board. Aaron Glenn is a guy that, because he's been a scout, because he's been an assistant coach multiple places, he has a lot of connections across the NFL, and that goes back to his playing days as well. And I think they wanted somebody that understands the lens of turning things around in a place where things have gone wrong for a long time. And what he's been able to do in that regard, in terms of playing days, listen, he was on a Jets team as a young player that had a 1-win season, right? And then Bill Parcells came in, and Aaron Glenn was a huge part of that, where they won 9 games and then they won 12 games. This was somebody that made the Pro Bowl both those years. And he's had an, interestingly enough, kind of similar coaching career where he gets to Detroit. Things are not great when that regime gets there. They clean it up, and in a couple of years, they're one of the best teams in the NFC. So this is somebody that it was built for it as a player, built for it as a coach. They knew it took a different kind of human, different kind of mindset in this place that has failed for way too long, and they're going to see if Aaron Glenn has one more in him in terms of turnarounds.
And like you said, Aaron Glenn knows New York. He was drafted 12th overall by the Jets in 1994 and played his first 8 seasons with the franchise. So, Connor Hughes, how much of this relationship they have influenced his hire?
Well, yeah, it helps. I mean, we all know Woody Johnson. We know this organization. The fact that he's a former Jet, it just feels right. And like Connor Rogers was saying, it was very important for this team. It's hard for a first-time general manager and a first-time head coach to succeed in this market where everything you do is overanalyzed, everything you do is scrutinized, everything you do is under a microscope. So having a familiarity with New York, that was either a familiarity with doing this job before or a familiarity with New York. That was a high priority for the Jets organization. But the fact that Glenn played here, yeah, that's a positive, that's a bonus, but it's who he is as a coach that is exactly what this organization was looking for right now. The Jets have been dragged through the mud the better part of the last 14 years. They've been mocked on talk shows. They've been mocked in the AFC East. They've been mocked all over the place. They want to find a way to reinstill pride in this organization, pride in wearing the Jets green again, a fear in opponents when you're playing the Jets. They don't want to be a stepping stone anymore. And some of the comments that guys like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall made towards the end of last season and after the season about how, it's just this losing culture and this losing mindset that's infected this team like a plague. They need someone to break them out of that. And you do that with a brand new culture. And that is exactly what Aaron Glenn is going to bring. And I know a lot of what I'm saying right now sounds a lot like what we talked about when Robert Saleh arrived with the Jets, but it's true. That's what this guy is going to be in Glenn. He's going to be a culture guy. He's going to be a feels guy. He's going to be a vibes guy. He's going to be, defensive minded, but he's going to take on a CEO type role. And the hope is that this culture and this feeling and this vibe that he brings finally snaps the Jets out of this rut that they've been stuck in.
And Connor Hughes, you just mentioned, Robert Saleh, first-time head coach. Aaron Glenn now is going to be a first-time head coach. A lot of people thought they should have someone who is already a head coach. So Connor Rogers, are you concerned that Glenn has never been a head coach?
No, that doesn't bother me as much because I think when people get tied up in that mindset, Jeane, and I understand it, you're kind of reaching for perfect, right? Because and sure, the Jets would have loved that in Mike Vrabel. I think, viewed him, as Connor has hinted at a couple of times, like that was a top candidate. But obviously when the Patriots job opened up, that wasn't going to happen here. And then you look at the guys that are available with experience, the pool of who is good becomes a little bit more limited, right? It would have came down to, hey, can we go get a Brian Flores, or do we want to go get a Brian Flores type? Or do we want to go get somebody that didn't have success the first go around like Matt Nagy or Steve Spagnuolo? It's when you're looking at that pool, I think it caps your upside. And with Glenn, he hasn't had the keys to the car yet, but that doesn't mean he can't be a really, really good head coach. And I think he's been in organizations, notably New Orleans, where he's seen stability when he was there, and then Detroit, where he learned how to build stability. So that doesn't bother me. Where I thought they actually should have been chasing somebody with experience, and this isn't common in the NFL world, but I expected them to turn over more stones with experience at general manager interviews, and they haven't done a lot of that. They did a couple guys like a Ray Farmer and some different personalities like that, but I thought they would have looked at maybe a Dorsey in Detroit or somebody along the lines of that. So we're going to see where that search goes, but that's not something that bothers me, especially in a world where there's just so much turnover.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the GM search because they're still looking for one. But Connor Hughes, you kind of mentioned it before. Robert Saleh came in, he was a first-time head coach, and he was a defensive-minded coach as well. Why do you think Aaron Glenn is going to be different than someone who a lot of people are saying, well, isn't this just like Robert Saleh?
We'll see. I mean, that's the thing about first-time head coaches, you don't know. Like, I have no idea if he's going to be different than Robert Saleh. I have no idea if he's going to be different than Todd Bowles. I have no idea if he's going to be different than all of the other first-time head coaches who failed, or if he's going to be the next first-time head coach who has success. It's just a new voice in there. It's a new message. It's a new person. And I do think that the fact that Aaron Glenn played in the NFL before, I think that's going to resonate a little bit more with players. You've seen guys already on social media like DJ Reed, Michael Carter, all speak out with votes of excitement for this. In fact, I talked to two other offensive guys who were really legitimately excited about the prospect of Aaron Glenn getting this head coaching job. But as far as how is he going to be different, I genuinely believe that the way that he's going to do that, Jeane, is it's going to be how he rounds out his staff. And we've already started seeing it a bit. And from talking to multiple sources across the NFL, Steve Wilks is expected to join him as his defensive coordinator. And I think that's a big one because not only has he been a coordinator before, but he's someone who has two stints, albeit short, one with an interim and then the 1 year with the Cardinals, where he was a head coach, and he can bring a wealth of experience there and help Glenn navigate some of the obstacles that he's going to come and face as a first-time head coach. And then the biggest hire that he is going to make, and I do not say this lightly, is the offensive coordinator. He needs to get that right. I think one of the biggest mistakes and the downfalls of Robert Saleh's tenure was when he moved on outside forces kind of pushed them there. But when they moved on from Mike LaFleur, because I believe that was an offense that was going to work as long as they had a quarterback in place that could run the offense. When everyone other than Zach Wilson was here, we saw that offense work. When LaFleur left, and then you brought in the mishmash of what's going to happen because this guy's friends with Aaron, that guy's friends with Aaron, and it just completely fell apart. But when you're a defensive-minded coach, you need to have the offensive system in place to find success, and that hire is going to be incredibly, incredibly important for Aaron Glenn. That's how they'll be different from Saleh, if he can get that hire right and stick with it.
Connor Rogers, you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple ways where I do think he'll differ, and I ultimately agree with Connor. Like, when you hire another defensive coordinator that doesn't have experience, there's just variables that more often than not, you don't know how it's going to go until you get to see them in those situations. But one, I think where he comes from in Detroit, I think he's adopted that aggressive mindset that Dan Campbell has. I think the Jets will be a much more aggressive franchise on the field. And that's not, that's on third down situations, fourth down situations. I think he's more in the mold of what we've seen in Dan Quinn in these playoffs as well. So that's one change. Schematically, I think they'll be more aggressive with man coverage. And I think that's going to be a really, really interesting thing to put on the plate of not only Sauce Gardner, but Michael Carter as well. And I think those guys with the personalities they have, they're going to it's going to reinvigorate them a little bit, the challenge that is when you play a little bit more man coverage. It's not saying it's harder or easier, it's just different. So I think that's something schematically that we'll see a difference with. And I think the third thing is, though, and this was a problem that Saleh had, especially when his hand was forced to fire LaFleur, he didn't have great hiring power. There was a lot of inexperience on the staff, a lot of guys in roles they hadn't been in before. I think Glenn is somebody that is going to build a balanced staff where there's experience at the top in some places. Some guys will have shots for elevated roles because you have to do that to poach them from somewhere. But I think the guys that do have that chance might have a bigger playing history as well. So I think the style of the staff will ultimately look much different than what we're accustomed to seeing.
And Connor Hughes, I'm going to go back to you because you said the most important hire for Aaron Glenn, and we all can agree on this, is the OC. Who do you think, who are some of the names you're hearing that should be the offensive coordinator and Aaron Glenn's staff?
Yeah, because as we talked about a little bit ago, Jeane, I mean, Glenn's been calling people and putting a staff together already, calling guys, engaging their interest in joining. And some names that I've heard specifically on the offensive side that he has had contact with, Clint Kubiak is one of them, Scott Turner. Nick Caley is one that is certainly atop the list, and I think is the number one guy that Glenn would like to bring with him to the Jets. He's somebody who currently right now is working within the Rams organization off of the Sean McVay coaching tree, and he's a younger guy who I think would relate really well to the players. He would bring new ideas. He's the latest, like I said, branch off of the McVay tree that's probably in line to eventually get a head coaching job. The thing that makes things a little interesting, though, with Nick is that he is working right now with the Rams. The person that he is working under right now with the Rams is Mike LaFleur, who we were just talking about, who was fired by the Jets, and I don't exactly think he's going to give a ringing endorsement for what it's like to potentially work here. And again, Caley's one of those guys where because of his resume, because of where he's working right now, he's going to have a ton of opportunities. So if the Jets can actually get him away from LA, I think that would be a tremendous hire, but there is some questions on whether or not they're going to be able to do that. We'll see how much say Glenn has and how good of a negotiator he has. And then one name that I did see circling around the internet right now that I can't confirm or deny this is Josh McCown. I know that would make a lot of sense. He has a tremendous relationship with many people within this organization, specifically Christopher Johnson, currently the quarterback's coach with the Vikings. But I will say specifically with McCown, he's a little bit more green right now than a lot of people believe. I know he is a tremendous leader, but I actually think he might have been better off for the head coach CEO role than maybe as an offensive coordinator, because his role right now with the Vikings, Kevin O'Connell does all of that game planning. Kevin O'Connell calls all of those plays. Kevin O'Connell really runs every facet of that offense. Josh McCown's role this year with Minnesota was pretty much just translate what Kevin O'Connell was doing into Sam Darnold terms. Did that very well because Sam Darnold had a career year, but I don't necessarily know, this is just my personal opinion, if Josh is ready yet for an offensive coordinator job. I think it might be a little too early, but certainly he has so many great relationships with people over here in the Jets that you can't rule it out. Interviewed for the head coaching job, so if he wowed people there, maybe he is in the running as well. But Nick Caley would be the one I would especially keep an eye on.
All right, Rogers, you throw out some names that you're hearing or who you think should be that OC.
Yeah, it's similar to what Connor said. I am fascinated by the Josh McCown factor because he's a total unknown as a play caller, as Connor said, but he does have a history here and a really, really strong relationship with important people at the top. And he's a really good voice to have in the room. What I'll say about the offensive staff that I think kind of, they tried different things in the offseason hires-wise, but they couldn't get a lot of them across the finish line. The structure of the offensive staff, who's calling the plays, is pivotal. But can you get a senior offensive assistant in here if it's a first-time play caller that understands how to game plan and understands at halftime, okay, what are some things that I'm seeing that can help you call within the flow of the game? Can you get a pass game coordinator in here? Can you get more importantly, I'll tell you right now, maybe just as importantly as the offensive coordinator, who's the offensive line coach going to be? Because you look at the most successful organizations in the NFL right now, the last man standing kind of teams, they all have high-profile offensive line coaches. A lot of people like to kind of put the cart before the horse sometimes and go, they have this guy, this guy, this guy on the offensive line. But what a lot of people don't realize is those guys became household names because they ultimately were developed by an offensive line coach. So I think at the end of the day, that hire is going to speak volumes to the kind of pull and power Aaron Glenn has. And it's one that, let's just say, it can't be a low-budget hire. You got to really, really pay up and get somebody that's a big-time move here.
All right, guys. Well, if you're just joining us, the Jets have a new head coach in Aaron Glenn. I'm Jeane Coakley alongside Connor Hughes and Connor Rogers. And Connor Hughes, you confirmed it that the Jets are hiring Aaron Glenn to be their 22nd head coach in franchise history. All right, guys, let's read what longtime NFL reporter Judy Battista tweeted. She tweeted a quote from former Jets coach Bill Parcells. He coached Aaron Glenn with the Jets and is pumped about the hire. Parcells said, quote, "He's not afraid to be contentious. He's just feisty, not rude or impolite. He's just willing to get his point across." End quote. I think that's what, if you're going to be in the New York market, that's what you need. All right, Connor Hughes, let's move on now to the GM search because they got a head coach. They still don't have a GM. So current Commanders assistant GM Lance Newmark is the only reported name for the general manager position that has come up for a second round interview. He has ties to Glenn. So what can you tell us about what's going on with that search?
That's a very, very fascinating one because everybody that I touched base with yesterday was under the assumption that Newmark was going there to get that job and it was going to be him and Glenn. And I talked to several general manager candidates and several agents that represent the general managers that the Jets had interviewed. And they all said that when the Jets called their candidates to let them know that they were no longer in the running, they hinted strongly that they were going in this direction of Newmark and Glenn. Now we see some reports coming out today that the Jets plan to open up their search a little bit more, and they plan to talk to some additional people, which, again, this is not reporting. This is just reading between the lines there. Maybe they weren't overly impressed with Newmark's second interview, although one source told me that Newmark was telling people that he felt he had a very good second visit with the Jets. So we'll see what happens there. But, an arranged marriage, I don't think usually works up top. You usually want to have the coach and the general manager with a pretty good understanding of each other and what each other wants to accomplish. And from talking to a couple sources around the league, Newmark's plans this offseason was to follow either Ben Johnson to the Raiders if he were to get that Raiders job. And then when Ben Johnson ended up going to the Bears, Newmark's plan was to follow Aaron Glenn to the Jets. That was the assumption that everyone made. That was what everyone thought was going to happen. And that was going up to last night when they left, was that this was inevitable. This was going to happen. The fact that this is now maybe not so set in stone, maybe something changed last night, I don't necessarily know. But if it is not Newmark, it's going to be very interesting to see who that is, considering the candidates they've said no to. I know Grigson's been told no to, but Connor, you and I were talking about this a little bit ago. If they do open up this search again and they want to bring in other people for a second interview, I think somebody who would be an A-plus hire who, admittedly, I did not know anything about before this hiring cycle, heard he was going to get interviewed, and then started making calls about who he is, just because when you talk about the Eagles organization, anyone from Howie Roseman piques my interest. Alec Hallaby, the way that he thinks about football, the way that he thinks about the NFL, the way that he thinks about team building and where the league is going, Aaron Glenn is kind of the hire that all of us 3 months ago would have said, yeah, he's probably going to be the Jets' next coach. Hallaby is the one that it would take a significant trust from Woody Johnson to make it, because it's not the cliche standard, this is what you should hire at general manager move. But I do believe that is the move that this franchise can make that would take them from chasing other teams to being in front of other teams and being in front of where the league is going. It would be a tremendous A-plus home run hire if they do open this up further.
I fully agree. I think it would be a move that speaks volumes to me of trying something different,
Yes.
right? Can you say, hey, maybe it feels like it's a year early. Maybe it's taking a data-driven approach that we have not really invested in at a high volume over the past couple years. But my number one concern with going down the Newmark road was it felt very similar to what they tried the last two times. So you look at Mike Maccagnan's road, longtime scout. You look at Joe Douglas's road, longtime scout, traditional football backgrounds. Yes, they held different roles on their come up, but Hallaby is a total new modern era kind of evaluator. So I'm with you all the way, Connor. That would be my number one phone call if they're going to really have a real second round, which I always thought they should have had a real second round. I don't typically fall in love with the idea of pairings for the sake of pairings, and Glenn and Newmark felt like a pairing that was for the sake of the pairing. It wasn't necessarily the best GM candidate. It was the one that Aaron Glenn has a very short history with. You got to realize Newmark was with Detroit for 26 years. The last three, he crossed paths. The last two, he crossed paths with Aaron Glenn. So it'll be interesting to see if John Eric Sullivan is somebody from Green Bay that gets a second call. Mike Borgonzi's obviously off the table, off to Tennessee. Do they expand this search even further? I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's going to be really, really fascinating to see where this thing goes now, because what once seemed like a done deal is obviously not even close to that at general manager.
All right, well, what is a done deal? As Connor Hughes confirmed that Aaron Glenn is going to be the Jets' next head coach. So I'm going to start with you, Connor Rogers. The biggest couple of challenges that Glenn's going to face as he steps into this new role as the Jets' head coach.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot of them. Number one being that you got to figure out who's playing quarterback next year, right? I think that matters a lot. And we laugh at it, but I mean, there is an Aaron Rodgers variable here, and let's, kind of go with the assumption that that's an unlikely one. It's not ruled out right now, but unlikely one. Then you have Tyrod Taylor on the books. Are you going to go try to find somebody to compete with him, like a Justin Fields in free agency? By the way, that free agency crop is really, really thin this year. Are you going to be aggressive in this draft? I would say most likely no. It's a thin quarterback draft, and the Jets are on the outside looking in terms of picking there. So that's a big equation that you need to figure out, because Aaron Glenn is not the type of guy that's getting here and he's just mailing it in year one because he has a cushion, right? He's going to want these guys ready to roll, ready to win. And that brings me to number two. I think Sauce Gardner and young guys like Jermaine Johnson, I don't worry about them being fully bought back in. And I don't question Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall's competitive nature, but you need to sell those guys that the long term is going to be looking much better here. And I think he's the type of motivational character that can get that buyback in, but it's not something that you earn in just a press conference. It's with your interactions. It's with your early practices. It's how you run a training camp. That's going to be a challenge for Aaron Glenn, which I think he's built for, by the way. And I think that was a big thought process in hiring him here. But everybody knows that that is something that he'll have to earn. And they want those guys here for the long term, we all think. But it's a long road ahead, I think.
Yeah, I think the only real major trouble or obstacle that Glenn's going to face is what to do with the other Aaron. It's Rodgers. Is he going to come back or is he not? And talking from a couple people around the league, there is no past relationship with Aaron Rodgers and Turner, Caley, or Kubiak to be like, oh, these are offensive coordinators he has a relationship with that he knows before that, oh, maybe this does indicate that he's going to take this job or he's going to come back for next year and the Jets going to want him back next year. So that I think is really the only main obstacle that he's going to have to figure out as quarterback. It's actually once the Jets hire the next general manager, he's the guy that's going to have obstacle after obstacle after obstacle to overcome, because the Jets, if they do move on from Aaron Rodgers, there are a lot of concerns about who their quarterback of the future actually is going to be, because it's not going to be Jordan Travis. They're not going to sign Sam Darnold in free agency, and they're not in a great position right now to draft somebody in the first round. So what actually is the plan at quarterback for the next general manager? Also, all of those contracts that Joe Douglas handed out with void years, this new general manager coming in, he's going to have to deal with those void years. What's his plan for that? No, the guys like Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, like Connor Rogers was just talking about, who's he going to pay? Because those decisions are coming up as well. So it's really the general manager, I think, who has a lot more potential roadblocks in front of him maybe than Aaron Glenn does.
All right, guys, one final question because we got to wrap up our coverage soon. So, Connor Rogers, how can Aaron Glenn find the balance of being a leader on the team, but also working with the defense who struggled and did not live up to its expectation last season?
Yeah, well, I think number one, he's a guy that wants to kind of dip his toes into all the waters on this team. I don't think he wants to just spend all his time with the defense. But like you said, Jeane, there is player development that is still at play here with this roster, and that is really, really key. So I think Glenn is somebody that when he steps on the practice field, knowing what he's done on the field and as a defensive coach already, those players on the defense are going to know this guy is for real. The expectations are going to be high. The bar is going to be set high. There's going to be accountability here. I think what's different, and this bothered me about the Jets all year, is if you go out there and you don't do your job and you're selfish with bad penalties and don't play well, that doesn't guarantee that you're the starter the following week. I think Aaron Glenn is willing to try different things. You kind of need to show that you're reliable. And so it goes both ways. It is a two-way street. And then when you look at the offense, which is an important variable here, there's things that he can coach up from the eye of a defensive guy that he knows, that he understands, and also how to develop a run game because the Lions were so good at that. He coached, practiced against that all the time in Detroit. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, what Ben Johnson was trying to do, a multiple offense, a balanced offense, and that's been a problem with the Jets there as well. So I think he's somebody that's not coming here and saying, hey, I'm going to call the defense and, hopefully my offensive coordinator does a good job this week. I think he's going to make a real concerted effort to have his hand in every aspect of this team.
Yeah, one of Robert Saleh's, I think, biggest flaws with the Jets, and I agreed with it in an extent, whereas he felt that the best teams were player-led and player-run. I do agree with that. You want to have the leadership within the locker room, players that can self-govern themselves, but you still kind of need that authoritative figure over the top, and that's what Robert never was, and I think that's why the Jets struggled so much with discipline. I think that's why this team struggled so much in crunch time, is that they still wanted somebody to set the tone. Robert expected that to be the players. I think the players were looking for that from the coach, and it just all fell apart. I think what Aaron Glenn's going to be tremendous at, and it's blending that relationship that we were just talking about, is be that main voice, that main leader, that person that all of the players can look up to, set the tone, and then your players and your leaders will be the ones that then continue to filter that out throughout the locker room. But he will be that person up there. And again, I can't overstate this enough. Players have a different level of respect for somebody who has done what they have done before. He has played in the NFL. He has played at the highest level of the NFL. He has been one of the best players in the NFL, and now he's been one of the best coaches and coordinators in the NFL. That's going to command a different level of respect than if you were to bring in somebody like a Ben Johnson or an Adam Gase, whose only resume is what they've done as a coach. The fact that they've bled for the game that these players have, that Aaron Glenn has bled for the same game that these players love and bleed for themselves right now, that's going to resonate so well throughout the locker room, so powerfully throughout the locker room, that I think his message will get across more than maybe somebody else would have. And that's what the Jets need.
100%. I've actually heard from a couple of guys on both sides of the field, and that's exactly what they talked about. He's been there, he's done that, and let's go. That was the message I got. All right, guys, once again, it was confirmed by SNY's Connor Hughes that Aaron Glenn will be the Jets' next head coach, returning home to the team that drafted him almost 30 years ago. That does it for us, but stay locked in to SNY.TV and our social platforms for the latest on Aaron Glenn, as well as the general manager search, because now we're looking for that. And then Honda Sports Night. Have much more tonight at 11 p.m. and all night for the two Connors. Hey, Connor Hughes, Connor Rogers, as always, great getting together, talking some positivity right now. I like it. I'm Jeane Coakley. Thanks for joining us.